because we do have an event in here this evening, and we get to rush over to Lord Fletcher's to present there later on this evening. We'll get things kicked off, but I just want to introduce Jay Blasi, everybody. This is our membership, and Jay has comes well recommended, and as we all know and have communicated, we've hired him to do a master plan for our golf course, and I'll let him take it over from here. But we're very excited. I think everybody is for us undergoing this, and really the point, right, of these sessions. He'll get into more, but of getting some member feedback. So at the end of the presentation, we want everybody to participate and provide some opinions on some of the goals that we want to come out of this process that we're looking towards the future, really next 30 years, right, of what we want our golf experience to sort of be and look like. So without further ado, Mr. Jay Blasi.
Thank you, Brian. And as he alluded to, the point of tonight, we're going to go through what I call the golf course audit, which is a big study of the golf course as it is today from a design and a maintenance standpoint. And ultimately, at the end, what we would like is to get your feedback, share with us what you think would be good goals for a master plan. Obviously, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have 300 people chiming in on the bunker on the third hole. But when we talk about setting goals for a master plan, that's a perfect opportunity to have member feedback. And so that's what we're going to try and go through. A little bit about my background. As Brian alluded to, my name's Jay Blasi. Golf's been a part of my life my whole life. My dad fell in love with golf. He was a caddy when he built his first house, built a little putting green in the backyard. So I've been playing since I was 2. When I was 4 or 5, I'd flip the placemat over at dinner and draw golf holes in crayon. So this is just all that I've ever wanted to do. I found out that most people got a degree in landscape architecture. So that's what I did, and then after school I moved out to California and went to work for Robert Trent Jones II. I spent 11 years there. In my time there, I got to work on some interesting projects. Chambers Bay is a golf course up in Washington. It's a sand and gravel mine. It's a municipal golf course owned by Pierce County, Washington. Most people know it because it hosted the 2010 U.S. Amateur and the 2015 U.S. Open that Jordan Spieth won. The Patriots, a private club outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. If you've ever heard of Patriot Golf Days or Folds of Honor Foundation, I think Brian and the team are going to do a fundraiser here soon for that. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney is the guy behind all of that. He's a golf pro, and he's done 3 tours of duty in Iraq, and his goal was to raise money for military families impacted by war through golf. And so our golf course there is the home of the foundation there. It's a pretty neat spot. After starting my own firm in 2012, I got to come back to the Midwest. I grew up in Wisconsin. I got to work at Century World. We redid the golf course there. They hosted the 2019 U.S. Girls Junior. They're going to host the 2023 U.S. Senior Open. They redid a golf course down in Orange County, California. And it's not on here, but I'm currently working with Pepperdine University to do their practice facility, so I'm wearing their colors because they just won the national championship last night. And that means that my budget for that project is going to go through the roof. So I am a happy camper. In addition to the golf design work, I do a little bit of work with Golf Week magazine. If you're familiar with kind of the course ratings and rankings that the magazines do, we have about 850 raters that go out and rate golf courses when they play. Myself and 3 other people serve on a little panel that kind of oversee the raters, and our job is to try and educate them on what to look for, things like that. So my job description is to host some retreats and give presentations like this, and then to write some articles for the magazine. So some people will ask about, well, what's the role of the golf architect? Do we really need one? We've got a green committee. It's important to understand this is your club. You guys make the decisions. What's right for Burl Oaks might not be what's right for another club down the street, right? So hopefully I can be helpful by sharing all sorts of ideas, walking you through the pros and cons of different options and things like that. But at the end of the day, you guys need to decide what's best for you. People will say, well, why do we have to go through this master planning process? What's the point of all this? And the reason why a master plan can be so helpful for a club is because the way that clubs are set up, just by their very nature, isn't very effective. It's counterintuitive. If you were to start your own business, you would never change the president of the business every year, right? The idea of this revolving leadership creates some challenges, right? What happens is you end up with one of two scenarios. First scenario is people get in a leadership position and they recognize that, oh, there's a lot of work to do, there's a lot of decisions to make. The decisions that I make are going to upset some of my friends. My friends are going to yell at me. So my stance is going to be, let's do nothing. Let's just get through my term without getting yelled at, right? So that's one group. The other group is, I'm in a leadership position. I've only got 2 years. I'm going to make hay while I got my 2 years, right? And so you end up with these different scenarios, and the golf course is what ends up suffering, right? So you end up making decisions in a very reactive manner. What's the fire today? Let's put that fire out. So you'll do something 1 year, you'll do something else 2 years later, something else 2 years later. 5 years from now, you'll undo what you did before, And so the master plan is the perfect opportunity to take a time out, try to look at the entire facility from 30,000 feet, gain an understanding of who are we, who do we want to be, and then make decisions based on that. Right? There's all sorts of good examples of clubs that have executed master plans and then taken that master plan and done work. Out where I live in California, a great example is the Cal Club near San Francisco. Great old course, dates back to the early 1900s. Famous architects had worked on it. And through no fault of anybody, just through kind of the evolution of being a club, it really changed over time. So you can see what it looked like 10 or 15 years after opening, and then over time, all of a sudden, stuff happened. We got lakes out there that weren't there, the bunkers moved, their shape changed completely, we got these big cart paths, hedges, trees everywhere, all this stuff just added, right? So they called a timeout. They said, well, who are we? Who do we want to be? What makes us special? And they said, well, we've got all this great history. Alistair McKenzie was the one who did our bunkering. Maybe we ought to focus on that. And ultimately, they came up with a plan where they did a hybrid. They restored a lot of the bunkering. They didn't have good practice facilities, so they redesigned. They had some unused land that they could take advantage of. They moved a few holes around and got a much better practice facility. But you can see they executed this plan, restored a lot of stuff, and by doing so, the course has really thrived. Now it's considered a top 35 course in America, full membership, national membership, price of membership has gone up tenfold, all that kind of stuff. There's examples of this all over. Here in the Twin Cities area and all over the country. People are doing master plans, doing renovation and restoration projects. This stuff is taking place everywhere. So what's the process? How do we go about this? Every architect's a little bit different, but I got a process that I think gives us the best chance for success. And when we think about a master plan, to me, a master plan is a 30-year vision for the future. And later on, I'll talk about why I choose 30 years. But it's not a project. It's a vision for the future. With any master plan, we can choose to execute projects in a lot of different ways. Right? You can do little things over a long period of time. You can do big things. But the master plan itself is just that vision. Right? So to get there, we start by studying what we have today. That's the audit. We'll go through that. Then we'll set goals. I'll work with a small committee. Once we have those goals established, to come up with different ideas and refine that into the master plan. Then we can get into the fun stuff and say, what do we want to do? When do we want to do it? How do we want to do it? And we can all fight about that, right? But it's going to be really easy to jump ahead and think about, when's the project start? And how much is it going to cost? Well, we don't have a project, and we don't know how much it's going to cost. We're focused on getting to a vision. So with that, we'll get into the audit, and we'll look at all the different elements of the course: the tees, greens, bunkers, fairways, rough, trees, cart paths, water, all that stuff. But we'll also look at the golf market, right? We'll look at the setting. We'll look at the overall property, things like that, the history. You guys may know all this stuff a little bit better than I do, but you know the history of the golf course, about 50 years old, started out as 9 holes, expanded. The layout's actually changed a few times. So here you can see the original 9-hole layout. Your clubhouse area is over here in this area, right? So we've got 9 holes. Then we expand to 18. We adjust the routing with houses coming in and things like that. And here we are today. So it's over that 50-year history, you've had plenty of changes over time. I always try to study what was here before the golf course and gain an understanding of what was the land like before the golf course came along. And you can see again, this is about where the clubhouse area is. This big wetland here, that's the area to the right of number 17. Okay. But you can see that the entire kind of back 9 area where the practice facility was, where the open land is, that was all open fields. So we had open fields, we had hardwood forests, we had open fields over here, and we had these kind of lowland areas. So if you just break it down into zones, you kind of had 3 big zones. The yellow are the open fields, the green are the hardwood forests, and the blue are kind of the lowlands. Very representative of southern Minnesota, right? That's what you would find as you wander all around the area. Again, you can see how that's evolved over time. This is right after the course first opened. Again, all of these holes out here were out in the open fields. Now you can see stuff getting added, whether it's trees or ponds, and here we are today. When we think about how we fit into the market, there's different ways to look at that. So we can just look at it by location. You're part of a group of clubs that are in the western suburbs, right? Whether it's Windsong or Spring Hill, Wayzata. You can do it by price. You can also look at it by design of golf course and you know kind of what decade you're in and what's the Twin Cities golf market kind of famous for. So there's different ways to put golf courses into context. When you think about the setting or the environment, some of the big takeaways are just those low areas and the drainage and the drainage issues that low area creates. And then we obviously know that all the ponds that have been added, the trees that have been added, those impact the play of golf and they impact the maintenance. And we know that there's a lot of residential growth that's moving out in this direction, right? So those are things to try and think about. It's important to think about how people use a golf club. That's changed over time, right? It used to be you'd come out, you'd eat, drink, play 18 holes of golf, eat and drink some more. It might be an 8 or a 10-hour day at the golf club. Nowadays, you got younger members who are working. They might not have 8 or 10 hours. They might have 1 hour or 2 hours. And so over the last 10 or 15 years, what we've seen is that the value of practice facilities or putting courses or short courses, those have skyrocketed in the last 10 or 15 years because people don't have the same amount of time. They'd like to come out and do something for an hour or 2. Right? So having an understanding of that. The other thing is, in the 70s and the 80s, hard golf courses were considered good golf courses. What we've learned over time is that golf is hard enough, right? For many people, making contact with the ball is a success, right? And what you see over the last 10 or 15 years is that fun golf courses are the ones that seem to be thriving and proving to be the most sustainable, right? So having an understanding of those types of things can be helpful as we try to plan for the future. The other thing that's important to study is the life cycle of a golf course. Most golfers come out and they play with their friends and have a good time. They might not be thinking about what's going on below ground. They may or may not know that there's miles and miles of pipe beneath them as they walk the fairways, right? And much the same way that the roof on your house doesn't last forever, the stuff that's below ground in the golf course doesn't last forever either. All the different agencies, associations got together, the USGA, the PGA, the Superintendents Association, the architects, the builders, they all got together and they tried to figure out how long does this stuff last, right? Whether it's your irrigation system or your pathways or your greens or your bunkers, how long does it typically last? What you'll notice is that most things last 10 to 30 years. And that's why I choose 30 years as the time frame for a master plan vision. If we know that we're going to need to invest in all of these different areas within a 30-year window, then let's have our vision, and that way we can execute on that vision however we choose. With that, it's important to have an understanding of where are we today, right? And you can see that some of the elements of the golf course out there today are at or towards their expected lifespan. So from a planning standpoint, that might help us understand what would be priorities and things to be thinking about sooner rather than later. Okay? So again, takeaways. Golf course doesn't last forever. It requires reinvestment, typically within a 30-year window. The next thing we'll study is the routing of the golf course. Most golf architects would tell you that the key ingredients for any great golf course is great routing and great green complexes. If you have those two things, you're on a good track for success. If you're missing one of those things, you're not going to have a great golf course. Right? You need both of those to have a great golf course. A routing, simply put, is where do the holes go? If you think about your property and the golf holes as puzzle pieces, you have 20 puzzle pieces, the 18 holes, clubhouse compound, and your practice facility. How do those puzzle pieces fit on your property? And as a golf architect, I'm not just worried about the tee to the green, I'm also worried about the green to the next tee. What is that experience like? We're trying to make the holes great and the transition from one hole to the next great as well. Right? There's lots of different ways to study routings. So I realize this is a little dark, but to get your bearings, this is the clubhouse. The routing today goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, the range is over here. So I always try to look at the property as a whole and understand, okay, where did they put the holes and what's left over? And one thing that you can see is, well, we got this big chunk of unused land over here. In different iterations of the golf course, there was stuff used over here. And then we have other areas. So the big takeaway here is you actually have space, more space than most golf courses of this age. Other things that you want to study are, do you have some safety concerns? And there are some spots out there where you could either hit a house or a road, or maybe the walk from a green to a tee can be kind of dangerous, or you can hit into another fairway, things like that. And what you notice is that for the most part, those things occur on the front nine. The other thing to look at is some of those transitions. So these purpley kind of pink areas, those are the transitions from one hole to the next. And you've got a number of them that are quite awkward. Either you finish a hole and you have to walk backwards, or in the case from 3 to 4, you got to walk past a house on a road and then go backwards. It's not very intuitive, right? If you were to go walk the property on its own, that's not how you necessarily move around. And these orange areas are kind of awkward shots, right? You've got spots out there. You take the second hole, for example. The hole is going right to left, but the land is going left to right, and it's pushing you into a spot where you got a pond, right? So it's a very awkward shot. You got a lot of shots out there where you've got trouble left, trouble right, lake left, lake right, no bailout anywhere.
We buy more balls here.
Brian was going to turn himself in for retailer of the year for golf ball sales. All of this water was added. This wasn't here. If you looked at what was here before the golf course, it was all added, right? And so a lot of those challenges have been created over time. So just a summary, you've got you've got the front over there, the back over there. They're pretty balanced in terms of their yardage. You've got some awkward spots, and you've got some unused land. Then I try to study the details of the course. And so this chart, the blue are the par 4s, the yellow are the par 5s, the red are the par 3s. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to understand How long are the holes? What direction are they going? Up or down? Left to right? Right to left? Where are the hazards? So you can get a sense of the variety and the balance, things like that. Okay? When you look at it this way, starting out with 1 and finishing with 18, you get a sense, okay, well, the par 5s are spaced out pretty well. That works pretty well. When you break it down by par, one thing that really jumps out at you is if you look at your par 4s and your yardage, you know, par 4s can range from 250 yards up to 500 yards, right? And yet if you look at the par 4s at Burl Oaks, they're all between like 380 and 410, right? So not a lot of variety. Again, I do the same analysis from the forward tees, right, to get a sense for how it plays from each set. You can see here again how things are spaced out, and they've got the same issue with variety, but maybe even an issue with the par 3s as well. So one of the really, really big takeaways is just the difficulty of the golf course, okay? Particularly for an average golfer. Easiest way to understand that is slope. The slope rating, in layman's terms, is potential for disaster, okay? Right? And the slope rating really applies to the average golfer. A scratch player's slope is not that important because they're good enough, they don't have disaster holes, right? But for the average player, slope is by far more important than course rating. And you'll see that you've got, you know, very, very high slope ratings. When you study the length of the golf course, like almost every golf course I visit, it's probably not long enough for your longest hitters, and it's way, 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 way too long for your shorter hitters, right? Not uncommon. The other thing to take note of is just where the hazards are placed are oftentimes on the side, and that's just punishing a bad shot. Who makes bad shots? Average golfers make bad shots. So your hazards are disproportionately impacting your average player. Right? Now we'll start to look at the different elements, and we'll go to the tees. So today you've typically got maybe 4 tee boxes on a hole. They're round or free form. Some of them have some maintenance challenges. Maybe that's not enough space on a par 3, so you get a ton of divots. Or you've got some trees very, very close to the tee box, which are limiting sun or having root issues. Some of them are at a 5% pitch instead of 1%, things like that. And again, when you study the distance and you look at the forward tees, over the last 10 or 15 years, we've learned a ton about how far people actually hit the golf ball. And it's largely based on your swing speed. And when you study that data, what you see is that slower swing speed players should be playing 3,500, 4,000, 4,200 yards, and yet we're asking them to play 52, 5,500 yards. For the most part, forward tee players don't think anything of it because that's just the way that it's been for 100 years. But if you were to ask your scratch player to go play an 8,600 yard golf course, they might be upset. So the forward tees have been unfair for 70 years. You know, it's much closer to a par 90 than a par 72. So having an understanding of that data can help us try to figure out where to best position things. In terms of the look, you know, we've got the round look today. Other places have a more squared off rectangular look. Other places have a situation where the tees flow right into the fairways, things like that. So there's different looks you can have. The other thing is from a resource standpoint, I realize it's not necessarily a crisis here today, but where I live out in California, resource management is huge. If we don't figure out how to use water and how to manage labor, we're not going to have golf in California much longer. And so one of the areas to really study are the areas around tees, right? If you think of the back tee, and you look just to the right of the back tee, nobody hits a golf ball there. And yet, oftentimes we're maintaining, we're watering, we're irrigating, we're fertilizing, we're mowing all these areas. So this is your tee boxes on hole 16 here, and you've got probably 2 acres of grass adjacent to these tee boxes that's not really in play where we're using resources. So long term, as we try and think about the sustainability, those might be things to think about or look at. As I've gone through this process at other places, we've been able to study this, set goals, and then achieve the goals, right? So at Century World, they wanted to host big events. They wanted to make their golf course longer. The golf course was way too tough for the average guest, so they wanted to make it shorter for the forward tee player. We were able to do both of those things and gain more angles and things like that. You know, on balance, you've got a decent amount of tee space, maybe the exception being some par threes. And then we want to study each complex to know how to make sure that we get enough sunlight and air circulation around them. The next thing we'll look at are the green complexes. And as I talked about before, a really, really key ingredient to any great golf course. And the green complex isn't just the green surface itself, it's kind of the 20 or 30 yards around it as well. So if you think about hitting an approach shot into the green, if you miss the green, where do you end up? Today, we always end up in rough, a bunker, or water, right? Having an understanding of that. So here you can see this is hole 1, 2, 3, all the way to 6, 7 through 12, all the way to 18. And when you study, you can see, okay, we've got some greens that are kind of set on different angles, a little bit different shapes, but by and large, for the most part, most of them are kind of set as ovals. They're pretty much 4,000 to 6,000 square feet. And when you look at where the hazards are, they're pretty much left and right, whether it's bunkers or water or rough. You know, if you miss the green, you're going to be in bunker, rough, or water. When you look at them from ground level, one thing that you notice is that there's lots of this little mounding, which was very common in the 70s and 80s, right? What is hard to take away if you're not paying really close attention is the impact of that mounding on the playability of the golf course. Those mounded up areas really make approach shots or recovery shots super, super difficult, and they take away kind of the usable playable space. The next time you go out there, go stand behind a green, look at the mounds, and imagine what it would be like if the mound wasn't there, and you'll be shocked at how much more space is available around a green complex. Again, if you study the size of the greens, most of them are pretty consistent. The exception being your 16th green is a major outlier. It doesn't relate to anything else on the golf course. It's also important to understand just the evolution of greens and green maintenance, right? Green speeds keep getting faster and faster and faster. If you were to look at the fastest greens in America back in the late 70s, they would be 7, 8s, and 9s. How many of you know what a stimp meter is and understand stimp readings? Okay. So nowadays we talk about 10 plus. For big events, we talk about 12 plus, right? Look at this. Augusta National as a 7. Okay? What happens when greens get faster is we need to make greens bigger so that the ball can run out. We also need to make greens flatter so that the ball can run out. So golf architects for years have been waving their arms saying, hey, we got to do something about these green speeds. They're getting way too fast. We have to keep making these greens flatter and flatter, and we're taking all the interest out of them. Right? So again, having an understanding of where the hazards are, where the bailouts are, you can have green complexes where if you miss a green, you might be able to use your putter, a 7-iron, sand wedge, all the different clubs in your bag. Again, as I've gone through this process at other places, we've been able to set goals and then achieve those goals. How many of you know what a USGA green is? Okay, a couple. So there's basically 3 ways to build a putting green. In the early 1900s, when they'd build a golf course, they'd go out to a field, they'd create their course, they'd scrounge up the best material they can, they'd push it up, and they'd make what we call a push-up green. Right? The other way to make a green is what we call a California green, basically where you have some drainage pipe and then a sandy layer. Okay? in the late 50s or early 60s, the USGA, they have a research arm called the Green Section. They invested a lot of time and money and energy trying to understand, well, what would be the best way to possibly build a green? And so they created what they call their USGA green, and that has drainage pipe, a 4-inch layer of gravel, and then a 12-inch layer of special sandy mix. Okay? And that's what you have here are USGA greens, with the exception of 2, 7, 12, 14, and 15. So while you guys go out and enjoy your round of golf and may not think anything of it, Nathan and his team are treating those greens completely differently.
Those are the original greens.
So in summary, again, kind of similar sizes throughout, a little bit of variety in terms of the shape and things like that. By and large, very simple contours, which means you can have fast greens. When we talk about the bunkers, you know, anytime you go to a club and talk about bunkers, people are always bitching about something. It's either too wet or it's too soft, they're too deep or they're too shallow, they're too white or they're too brown, they're always too something. Nobody's ever happy with their bunkers. If you look at the bunkers that are out there today, we know they were done about 5 years ago. They're, for the most part, they're what we call kind of a flat bottom and grass face style. Oftentimes they're detached from the green, so you've got this kind of 5 or 10 yard gap of rough between the bunker and the green. And then I try to study where are they on the golf hole and who does that impact, right? And there's basically 2 different ways to lay out your bunkers. There's strategic design, which means if you place the bunker in such a way that maybe if you hit the ball over the bunker, you gain an advantage, or if you play as close to that bunker as you possibly can without going in, you gain an advantage. And then there's what we call penal design, which is they're basically just there to punish, okay? We have penal design, right? If you think about the first hole and the bunker on the left, if you hit it over that bunker, do you gain an advantage? No, you're in a wetland, right? So by and large, throughout the golf course, the bunkers are there as punishment. Well, who are they punishing? For the most part, they're punishing the average golfer, right? Because they're off to the sides. If you put a bunker left and a bunker right, a scratch player looks at that, sees that, and says, okay, I'll go between them. And they're good enough to execute that. The average golfer gets up, looks at that, is terrified, tries to figure out what to do, and they end up in that bunker, and now they got to figure out how to get out, right? So again, you know, even though they were done fairly recently, there's still some areas where we've got some drainage issues, particularly in low areas. Lots of times nowadays that when they build bunkers, they use what we call a liner, which you can put underneath it to help, whether that's for washouts or holding the sand up, or even just for little animal stuff. We'll talk about the fairways and the roughs and how those evolve over time. Right? So this is one area that I kind of go around and I look at old golf courses and I look at how they evolve over time. And so it's pretty interesting to see what happens. But for the most part, you've got bent POA fairways. They're, you know, small to medium in terms of their width. But what you notice is that they really narrow when you get towards the green. They all pinch right in, right? And what that means is that you have to hit this kind of high, soft aerial shot into the green. This is your 13th hole. Tee off here, play to here. That 13th hole has stayed in the same spot throughout the evolution of the course, but you'll notice the fairway used to be 47 to 58 yards wide. Nowadays, we're 33 to 37 yards. How does that stuff happen, right? That's very common. Well, what typically happened was you'd have a golf course. Any open area on the golf course, they'd go out and plant trees in between holes. And those trees would get bigger and bigger and bigger and wider and wider and wider, and then they would start shrinking the fairways to keep the fairways away from the trees. You've got a lot of rough out there, acres and acres and acres of rough. The bluegrass rough gives a nice look to it. As long as it's not too high, it's playable. But we know that in many of your areas, you've got drainage issues, and so I'm sure that everybody in this room at some point or another has maybe gotten stuck in a cart somewhere out in the rough after a rain. So, you know, when you have a lot of rough and narrow fairways, there's basically only one way to play a hole. There's not a ton of strategy. Call it bowling alley golf, right? There's one way to play it. There's no advantage to being on the right side or the left side type of thing, right? Earlier I talked about bunkers and how those can be a polarizing topic at clubs. Perhaps the most polarizing topic at clubs are trees and tree management. Lots of stories about fistfights amongst membership over trees. So golf architects have been talking about, writing about trees on golf courses for over 100 years. So you can see, Ross talks about being part of the scenery but not part of the stage. As you can see today, we've got lots of trees out there. Some of them are becoming part of the stage. Again, it's also really important to note that trees and turf are mortal enemies. Right? They both want the same things. They want sun, they want air, and they want water. And they will fight to the death to get it. So if you want quality turf grass in a spot, you can't have trees there. That's just the way that it works. So you can see we've got some of those spots. Again, I always try to understand what was the property like before the golf course. And again, you can see, we had these open fields, hardwood forests. As I talked about before, golf architects have been writing about these things for years and years and years. And so ultimately what you want is you want to find a way to have trees on the golf course enhance the experience as opposed to taking away from it, right? I love trees. Most people love trees. But you want the way that the trees are set up on the golf course to add to that experience rather than taking away from it. I try to study some of the best golf courses around to see, well, how do they do it? How do they treat their trees? These are 5 different golf courses in 5 different settings all around the country. Can anybody name any of these? Anybody know where that is? That's Augusta National. No, anybody know that one? Shinnecock in New York.
It looks like Seminole.
Seminole in Florida. This is Oakland Hills in Michigan. San Francisco Golf Club in California. So 5 courses, all in the top 30 or whatever, all around the country, different climates, different environments, and yet they treat their trees the same way. First thing that you notice is around the perimeter of the property, they have a heavy wooded buffer, right? All around the edge. The next thing you notice is if you look at the middle of the property where the golf holes are, it depends on what was there first. Does anybody know what Augusta National was before it was a golf course?
Nursery.
It's a nursery, right? So there's a lot more trees at Augusta National than there are at Shinnecock, which was open fields, right? Same thing here at San Francisco Golf Club. They have cypress trees, groves of trees, as opposed to little lines down each fairway. And then the last thing that you want to study is what goes on around the clubhouse. If you look at the clubhouse area in each of these spots, you'll notice that immediately around the clubhouse there are very few trees. There are either no trees or maybe one iconic tree. Well, why is that? Well, you've got one of the greatest backyards on earth. You want to see it, right? If you had a great lot out on Lake Minnetonka, the last thing you'd do is plant a big tree between your great room and the lake, right? So if you look at all of these areas, there are basically no trees within 150 yards of the clubhouse. From about 1940 to 1995, pretty much every single golf course in America planted trees. So much so that they would have a line item in the budget, the maintenance budget every year would have a line item for tree planting. They'd just go out and plant trees. From 1995 until today, pretty much every single golf course in America is removing trees. And the reason for that, A, they shouldn't have been there to begin with, but B, they grew up. They got much bigger and wider. And what you see above ground is mirrored below ground, right? And those tree roots are compromising drainage pipes and busting up irrigation pipes and all sorts of other things. They're fighting for water with the turf. So this stuff has happened all over the country, the tree work. But you saw that quote about, there might be a good view behind something else. I can guarantee you that this is Sleepy Hollow in New York. You look at this is a nice picture. Looks like a nice golf hole, pretty trees, right? But if you're not paying close enough attention, look at what you're missing out on. That's the Hudson River back there. Right? And so I can assure you that there were fistfights over removing those trees. So again, I like to study the best golf courses, understand what they did, to see how you can apply that to maximize and enhance the golf experience. Right? And one thing I'll do is I'll take cues from a city skyline. So if I asked you to close your eyes and think about the skyline of Atlanta or Houston, huge cities, hundreds of buildings, right? And yet you probably couldn't tell me anything about their skyline. Nothing distinct. And yet, if I asked you to tell me about Washington, D.C., you could tell me all about it, even though it's a much smaller city with fewer buildings. The reason for that is they gave their best buildings or monuments a big stage, right? So they highlighted the special elements, and they gave them a big stage. And now you see them from a distance, they become a focal point, you move closely to it, you have a very different experience when you're next to it, and then you work your way away from it. So, things to think about in terms of how to maximize the potential of the site. When you talk about water on golf courses, it largely depends on what type of water it is. If you've got a great natural body of water, Pacific Ocean or Lake Michigan, as an architect, you try to maximize that and take advantage of that. You want as many holes as possible near the water, looking at the water, all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, if you don't have those elements to begin with, most golf architects don't try to add water. And the reason for that is that water, there's no recovery from water. And the recovery shot is one of the great shots in golf. If you think about your rounds of golf and what you talk about in the bar afterwards, more often than not, it's that great recovery. We've got lots of water in play. This is just the front nine, all the spots that it's in play. And again, sometimes it's left and right. And here we are on the back side. So because of where the water is, not a lot of bailons. Again, when you study great golf courses and understand how do they deal with water, for the most part, if there was good water there, they take advantage of it. If it wasn't, they don't add it. Right? That's Cypress Point, Sand Hills in Nebraska, Oakmont, Pinehurst. Again, if you study the very best courses, whether they're new or old, same principle applies. This is all the water that's been added over time here. Right? And you can see that really comes into play on lots of holes and on lots of holes. It's on both sides.
It seems like a gigantic misconception to me that water's been added to this golf course.
Yeah. Well, we saw the slides earlier, right?
Yeah, but actually, they were actually made bigger because it settles so low here that all the ponds that really show that they're large, they were made larger because it was for drainage issues.
Yep.
So I mean, those waters were always there. I mean, there might be one or two that weren't there. They were marsh, I think. Yeah.
See, they weren't. You're right that there were low areas, and so they were probably created to try and assist some
I
drainage.
figured 30 years and all those waters were there.
Correct.
In
That-
low areas, we had fish in the fairways on 13 and 14 after a 1-inch rain. It's a matter of routine.
Did they taste good?
No, I don't think so. Maybe they did want me. The raccoons.
Fish in the fairway. That's a new one.
Oh, yeah.
But
So,
you are aware that we are limited on the number of cubic feet per minute we can take off this golf course. Correct?
I am aware
Because
that.
that's the elephant in the room. That and the fact that 2/3 of the golf course is the bottom of a swamp.
I'm keenly aware of those things. Yes.
And there's only one exit.
I think that
There's only one exit that goes underneath the highway.
Yes.
And the culvert was changed by the state or county only about 10, 15 years ago. So a lot of that has to do with what you do internally before the water gets there.
I understand all that. Yep.
I mean, we used to have places where there were ponds anytime after it rained, whether you like it or not. It wasn't an official pond, but.
Correct. Yeah, you make a very good point. You know, when you have a low area and you're trying to play golf, one of the common solutions is to take the general low area, designate a spot, say, let's make that the lake. We'll take the material from that. We'll try to raise up the other area so that we can play golf. Right? That's the way to try and solve some of those issues. Right? I realize it's not necessarily a pressing issue today here, California it is, but water conservation is a big deal. So having an understanding as to what goes into that, you know, an irrigation system built today operates very differently than one from 30 years ago in terms of its efficiency. Where you the amount of maintained turf that you have on the golf course plays a role in terms of those resources, things like that. So again, just on balance, lots of water added over time. It limits the bailout options or limits the playability. And we'll look at the pathways, right? Pathways drive golf architects crazy. You try to create this beautiful hole, this beautiful picture, perfect field of play, and then you've got to put this asphalt or concrete or stone ribbon right through the middle of it, right? We don't have full-length paths, but you've got close. You've got maybe 85% paths that are out there today. And what you notice is that the paths, they're in play and they're in view, right? There's a number of holes where you get on the tee and your eye goes right to the path, right? And there's also a number of holes where you get on the tee or you're on a shot and the path is in play. If you think about hole 10, you might hit a shot and it's going towards the water and you're saying, hang on, and then it hits the path and then it goes into the water, right? So it's, they're in view and in play. We know that you've got different materials out there. I know they were redone recently. The brown stone paths for Brian for Nathan wash out a lot and may create as many challenges as they solve for him. So things to be thinking about are locations and how does that impact the view? How does that impact the play? Materials, things like that. You've got a lot of structures around the golf course. And again, those things typically get added over time, and sometimes they relate to the clubhouse or some theme, and sometimes they don't. So when you study the different elements out there, you can see we've got different materials, different looks, different feel. So if you're planning for the future and you know that you ever have to touch one of these areas, you may want those things to all relate to each other and have one consistent theme throughout. When you look at the practice facilities, again, here's the clubhouse. This is the driving range. You can see the look here. Pretty big space, pretty nice, close to the clubhouse, long. You've got lots of tee space, but the way that it's set up into these little 4 smaller tees, and so oftentimes those can get beat up. So are there ways to have more tee space so you can hit off a good grass more often. It does face east, which can be a challenge for morning sun, so are there ways to maybe have additional tees that go a different direction, things like that. But by and large, pretty good. Your short game area, you have one, that's great, but for most short game areas, what you want is you want to have a green that's representative of a green you'd find on the golf course, maybe a bunker that's representative of what you'd find on the golf course, fairway and rough areas that relate to the green the same way they are out on the golf course. So we have an area, we have a short game area, but right now it's not very representative of what you'd find on the course. Right? We have a practice putting green, but it's pretty small and it's got pretty good slope to it, so sometimes it maybe isn't maintained at the same speed as the greens on the golf course, just so that they can get hole locations on it, things like that. But it is near the clubhouse, and so, you know, is there an opportunity to maybe expand that and have more room to practice putt? So again, you've got all of the different elements that you'd want, but there may be opportunities to make them better and more attractive and more useful in helping you practice. So when we take a step back and take a big picture view of things, when I studied the golf course, to me the strengths are just the property itself, right? It's a very beautiful setting. For the most part, it's a core layout. There's only the one street with the houses that come into play. It's a very walkable layout, right? The clubhouse is set up in a good spot, kind of centrally located, high point with the views and things like that. So you've got lots of good things going. In terms of the weaknesses, the first thing that steps out is just the difficulty of the golf course. The golf course is just really, 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 really hard for an average golfer, right? The other thing that really stands out is just the drainage issues, right? And how, you know, over time with more and more residential growth, those things are likely to become a greater challenge, not relieve themselves. So things to be thinking about for kind of long-term sustainability. You've got some other spots, whether it's awkward spots in the routings or the impact of the paths and the water, all that kind of stuff. Where are the opportunities? Well, the first thing that stands out is there's probably an opportunity to try and make the golf course more fun, more playable, more strategic. And that way, average golfers can have a much better golf experience. It doesn't mean that you're going to make the golf course easier for the scratch player. In fact, doing those same things can make the golf course more thought-provoking and challenging for the scratch player. Can we wait till we're done? We're almost done?
Sure.
Okay. You know, can you improve some of your drainage situations by reconfiguring some of your water, right? The same way that it was done in the past, can you reconfigure it to try and make it better? Can you have more width? You know, we've heard that the 16th hole was voted people's favorite hole. I would contend that that's because you finally have a wide golf hole. You play your round, right? You're playing your round. You've got trouble left, trouble right. The whole day you're kind of terrified to where the ball's going to go, and you get to 16 and you got room, right? You know, what can we do on those fronts? Again, I talked earlier about slope rating and how that relates to the potential for disaster and how that relates to the average golfer. And so at other projects that I've worked on, we've been able to get the slope rating to go down, to reduce that potential for disaster. And we did that at the same time we got the course rating, which impacts scratch players. We got the course rating to go up. So we were able to make it more thought-provoking, more challenging for the scratch player, and more playable for the average golfer. Seems counterintuitive, but it can be done. So what are the constraints? Well, you've got the houses and the road. That's probably not going anywhere. We don't know the exact details on what can and can't be done in any one particular water body or anything like that. We know that when it comes time to talk about any potential project, you'll have a certain group that's going to be opposed to it regardless, 10 or 20%. You know, you could offer free money and they'll be opposed. They'll probably be very vocal about it, right? But at the end of the day, when it comes time to talking about anything, it likely boils down to three things. Money, can I afford it? How much do things cost? What's the closure time, right? Do we have to have long closures, or can we have very minimal impact for anything? And some people will just be opposed to kind of any change. I'm too attached to what I have. And that's okay, but it's important to know those things kind of up front as to what are things that get discussed. So, some big picture takeaways. The golf course, the elements of the course don't last forever, typically up to 30 years, so we need to plan for reinvestment. What you've got today is a really special place, right? You guys are all here for a reason. Probably all have great memories playing out here and having a good time and enjoying the space. Having said that, if you study the details, there's probably an opportunity to make it even better, right? And when we think about what's going to provide the best long-term sustainability for the club, whether it's maybe adding some amenities that will attract future members that take into consideration kind of where golf is headed, you've got some unused space, and so you've got some flexibility and potential to address those things. When I do my work with Golf Week magazine, when we rate golf courses, we have 10 different categories that we look at, right? We give courses a score from 1 to 10 in each category, and then you give it an overall number, and the overall number doesn't have to be the average of the other 10. The best golf courses in the country get like between an 8 and a 9. If you get a 7, a score of a 7, you might be a top 100 golf course in the country. So just a sense as to how those things fit. When I study the golf course as it is today and I look at all the different categories, to me there are certain spots where you've got greater potential for improvement than others. So when I look at the routing, when I look at the shaping, and when I look at the landscape and the tree management, in my opinion, those are the areas where you've got the most potential for
Is
improvement.
the quality of feature shaping, is that the design of the whole?
So-
Up leg left, up leg right? or-
So no, the shaping would be like the mounding, the contours, the details of the bunkers and things like that. So the whole point of today was to share the audit and to have you guys ultimately help us set some goals. When I think about what might be good goals from my perspective, things like making the course more fun and playable, could you add different amenities like an event lawn or a short course? Can you embrace the landscape that was here before, strategy, variety, things like that. But ultimately, we want to hear from you guys. What do you think are the best goals? So with that, I'll open it up to questions, and then hopefully we can get you guys to share what you think would be a good goal. So I'm going to start in the back because I cut you off when you had your hand up.
No worries. I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on what's an average golfer.
An average golfer.
Because you refer to it a lot. So
Sure.
Who's the average golfer?
Yeah, I would say anything above a 10, okay? And that's a wide range. That could be somebody who's young, it could be old, could hit it far, could hit it short, but by and large, they're definitely not breaking 80, and they're probably struggling to break 90.
Hey, Jay, when they ask the question, will you repeat it just so they can hear what's
Yes.
going on here?
Yeah. So the question is, what is an average golfer, right? And so, in my mind, an average golfer is somebody who's over a 10 handicap. Doesn't necessarily mean that they hit it long or short, but they're probably not breaking 80 and probably struggling to break 90.
So we've always had this dichotomy here where people say the course is too hard, and then these young guys come and say it's too short. Right? I mean,
Well, hard and short are two different things.
I know
but-
more of that. I've been here 30 years.
Yeah.
And I got kids that play it really well. So.
Well, those things can both be true, and the fact is that for these young guys and for top players, you just can't build a golf course long enough, right? I mean, the way that they hit it, they're hitting it now, 330 yards off the tee. I think Dustin Johnson said he went an entire year on the PGA Tour where he never hit anything more than a 6-iron into a par 4, right? Now, we just before this, we had a session with the ladies. The ladies shared with us, or a big portion of the ladies, said that they'd never hit a single par 4 in 2
Right.
with an iron.
I agree
And
with
that
that.
most of them, it was driver, 3-wood, and then whatever. But the driver and the 3-wood were the automatic part, right?
I
And then,
agree.
you know, so you have 2 just different games,
Yeah.
right?
I agree with that 100% for the ladies, 100%. And, but people look at our scorecard and say, it's too short a course for the single digits. So how do you get over that?
Yeah, so the question was, people will look at a scorecard and think, oh, the course is too short, so they maybe play a tee that they shouldn't play, and then they go out there and then they experience the course. So,
They lose 5 golf balls.
so you know, as a private club, you're likely to play here over and over again, so hopefully you'll learn some of that over time. But for guests and things like that, yeah, so that's where if people were smarter, they would pay more attention to the slope rating than the actual yardage and things like that. But you know, it is true that you know, we get stuck in our ways. There's so many of us that go out and we play the course, and maybe we play the course 50 times in a year, and we play it from the same exact tee all 50 times. And as an architect, particularly at a private club, I want to build in as much variety as possible. I'd love for you to play a par 4 from 320 yards one day and 420 yards the next, and do that throughout the whole golf course so that you can get, you know, you've got one piece of property, but if I can give you 6 golf courses in one, to me, that's a real win. It can give you a lot more variety, a lot more fun. It can also help spread out the wear pattern. You know, if you're a course that gets heavy play, it can be helpful to maintenance to spread out the wear patterns and things like that. So in terms of kind of breaking the cycle, what we found at some places is you actually have to force people to do it. So you have special events, and we all go play from the forward tee. And while some people may roll their eyes, after the end of the day, you might have a handful that said, boy, that was actually fun. I played in 3 hours and 15 minutes, and I made 2 birdies, and I made 5 pars that I never do that, and I'm going to try that again. Right? Sometimes
you're out of the club.
sometimes you gotta give people that nudge.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. And our drainage issues used to be way, way, way worse than they are now.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done one great work. Nathan and his crew has done wonderful work.
So when you talk about improving the practice facilities, what are the opportunities you see there? Because I mean, our putting green is as bad as it gets, and our chipping area is pretty bad too.
So, you know, with the putting green, you can want a couple different things. One is you want it to be representative of what's out on the golf course. So there's basically 2. When it comes to practice areas, you want to think about it in 2 ways. You got the person who's showing up and going to hit a few balls, hit a few chips and putts before the round. And so from that standpoint, you want it to be representative of what you're going to find out on the golf course. Many clubs recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, have recognized that these can be real amenities that attract members and whatever. And so if you've got people who might be range rats or want to come out and just practice, they're not necessarily playing, but they want to really get their short game better, or the putting course. Maybe a putting course can be an amenity. If you have a really big putting green where you can put out 18 holes, maybe that becomes a place where people like to congregate and drink and gamble, and it's good for the juniors and things like that. So, you know, with a putting green, size matters. You know, can we have enough space? Slope, you want it to be representative of what's on the golf course, right? And then in terms of a short game area, I think I talked about it, is you'd like there to be a green that's representative of what you find in the course, bunker, fairway, rough. And ideally, you'd like to have plenty of room. Maybe you can have 2 or 3 of those greens so that you can have multiple people out there at the same time, or you can hit kind of any type of shot inside of 50 yards, things like that. With your driving range, a lot of it boils down to tee space. And, you know, 2 things that you find at just about every golf course is their driving range doesn't have enough tee space, and their par 3s don't have enough tee space. You just can't build enough tee space for driving ranges and par 3s, right? Should we make that a goal? We want to list some goals.
Short course.
What's that?
List the short course behind the drive range. Short course.
I like it.
Yeah.
Continuing on with the range conversation, you alluded to the fact that the sun is a problem. We have a long range as it is, potential building tee grounds at the opposite ends of the range, so we can play from both ends at given times, and build your practice area at the far end of the range. We've got the space for it out there, and you go to some of the best courses in the country, and that's the way the ranges are set up, so that you're practicing from both ends, and their real practice area is at the far end of the range.
And they do lessons on the far end too, a
Right,
lot of
yep,
times.
that, that can be a great thing.
It's a challenge to get out there safely then.
Yeah.
We'll get you a perfect space on that.
Maybe a better design to make some trees shade out like a fairway.
We need a helmet, yeah.
Well, Nathan needs his work area too.
Could you speak to the next to the last goal, add event lawn, club hands?
Yeah, so again, clubs are different. Some clubs do lots of weddings and banquets and things like that, and so that's a big part of their business as a club. And with that, oftentimes they want to have an outdoor space to accommodate some of those things. Other clubs feel like it's part of their culture, and they want to just have as much member engagement as possible. So, you know, right now you've got this little space over there by the putting green that kind of serves as a wedding lawn, but in reality it's not a very special space with the telephone pole and whatnot. So, you know, is there an opportunity to have a space that's kind of a big flat open lawn that you can either use as is, or you could put a tent out on it if people wanted to have an outdoor space. Maybe it's a spot with a good view, things like that, that could become a place for the club to utilize and set up events. I did that when we did the project in Southern California, in Santa Ana. Very small property, they didn't have anything like that, and we were able to design that in, and now they use that all the time for, you know, if they're gonna have a big golf event, they'll set up a tent out there, and that's where people will meet up at the end and things like that. So, and then club hang areas. You know, one of the things you're noticing is that clubs are kind of taking their cues from resorts. A lot of these younger members will go on golf trips, and they'll say, oh, this place was so cool. They had this fire pit over here, they had this putting course, and they had a little short course, and I had more fun there than I would ever have anywhere else. And so some of those things are actually coming back to the club. And so these kind of hangout areas where it's not necessarily a traditional 18-hole round of golf, but if I've got an hour or I've got 2 hours, where do I want to hang out? Do I want to hang out at a big putting course that has a fire pit and Adirondack chairs next to it? Do I want to play a little 9-hole short pitch and putt course that I can go play in 45 minutes and play with my friends, or take the grandkids to, or whatever, you know? So those are some of the kind of potential types of things like that.
Blasi,
I'm
well-
barely a new member, but I noticed they had a wedding here one time, and they were up, you know, in the wedding area, but then they decided they wanted some other pictures, so they all walked the whole wedding party down onto the 9th hole
Yep.
to take pictures while people were playing.
Right.
It was like, oh my gosh, but Brackett's has a nice wedding area over to the side.
Right.
So there are, I agree with that. Plus, the other area that I see as a problem is when the truck comes, like we're all kind of in
I don't think I'll be playing here in 30 years, and I agree with all of this stuff.
But two more.
But just to narrow it down, over say the next 5 to 10 years, making the course more playable, I can see where we could widen the fairways in some areas, we could take some trees down, we could move some bunkers. But if we had to blow out some greens like number 7, what's the downtime? Are we gonna be out the whole season without a green, or can that be dealt with in another way?
Yeah, so the question was about if you had to get into different types of work, such as redoing green complexes, what's the turnaround time on that? One of the things that you've seen over the last 5 or 10 years is that downtime is such a huge issue, and so construction windows have been shortening just because of membership desires. You know, members really do not want downtime, right? And so there are limitations. You have to think like a farmer, and you have to figure out when is the grass going to grow, and you have to schedule and plan backwards to that. So it would all depend on what the scope of work is. Oftentimes in the upper Midwest, people try to do a lot of kind of fall projects, and so they're not impacting as much play. That depends on what the scope is. And then obviously whether it's seeding or sodding impacts the recovery time and things like that. So it would be on a kind of a case-by-case basis, but for the most part, you're trying to execute things with as little downtime as you can, and you can find creative ways so that you can accomplish the work. You know, the truth is, you saw the slide as to the things that we'll need to touch. You know, at some time you got to do the work, right? And so then how do you manage that in such a way that the amount of downtime can be the least amount possible? How do you manage that so that the expense can be the least amount possible? Things like that.
And just to follow up, what did you think of our greens overall?
Well, I think that, you know, the big takeaway in terms of the USGA versus the push-up greens, you can tell a difference on some of those push-up greens, whether it's size or contours that go with them. For the most part, they're very benign. They're very simple in terms of their contour, which allows you to have them be very fast. Nathan and his team do a great job in terms of the maintenance standpoint. So in terms of ball roll, very nice. In terms of speeds, very nice. In terms of architectural interest, not a ton there, right?
So we could build a whole list of, practice facilities, short game, et cetera. It seems you have a line up here that says introduce a strategic design philosophy. If you took, and I agree with that philosophy, but if you took philosophy off and how about a strategic design plan, is that what you're working towards with the board?
Well, I'm not working with the board towards anything. We're at step 1 in the process.
Well,
So the
step
first.
5 I thought was a master plan
Correct.
of some sort. So is that going to be a master plan with a design philosophy behind it?
So the master plan will be a vision for the future. So it'll be a picture of the golf course. Where do we want everything? Where do we want everything to be? So do we want the bunkers to stay in the same spot, or do we want a bunker to move?
So
Do we want the fairways to be the same width, or do we want the width to change throughout the whole hole or certain portions of the hole? Things like that.
So the design philosophy, would that be more of how do you like return to the natural setting at the beginning, like you were talking about?
Well, when
or-
we're talking about strategic design philosophy.
Right there.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's basically 2 different schools of design. There's strategic and there's penal. And today you've got penal, right? There's one way to play the hole. If you don't execute, you're punished. And so when I say introduce a strategic design philosophy, that's suggesting that perhaps we could have more strategic elements where there's multiple ways to play the hole. So if you can't fly the ball 250 yards, maybe you've got a good route to avoid trouble. If you can't hit it over the water, you've got a way to bail out, things like that.
And my guess would be that also includes, the forward tees and possibly longer tees too, right?
Yeah, those
So to
things.
me, that's very important.
Yeah.
Because you get both ends, right? You get the it's more challenging for your low handicaps, and it's more playable for your average golfer.
Yep.
And that seems really important to keep a broad base of membership.
Yeah, that can be key for sustainability. I mean, again, every club is different. So like Windsong, probably caters to lower handicap players. If you're a scratch player, maybe that's where you want to go hang out and be with other scratch players. But if what you feel like is the greatest asset at Burl Oaks is a friendly culture, a place where people feel comfortable and want to have fun and have a good time in a casual atmosphere, you might want your golf course to represent that.
From my perspective with my wife, she's intimidated by this course. I am too. I still play by new balls. But she's really intimidated even if I would put her up by what's considered the family tees, those way forward tees as she's learning to play the game. So what I've heard you say is you can make it more enjoyable for somebody like her or a higher handicap person, but still keep the longer ball hitters interested in this course, that they're willing to come back. One thing I found though is, for how much it intimidates me, when I go other places, my handicap travels pretty well.
Yep.
So in one of your bar graph charts, you said that women have trouble getting on the holes, 4s and 3s by the scores, wasn't it?
So when we looked at those bar graphs, one of the things that I was pointing out is there's kind of a lack of variety in the distance of the par 4s and the
So
par
we
3s.
need more forward tee boxes?
Well, when if I'm designing a new golf course, and let's say we're gonna have 4 par 3s, I would love for those 4 par 3s to go in 4 different directions. I'd like one to go north, one to go west, east, and south. That way, you're interacting with the sun and the wind differently. I would love to have maybe one of them go uphill, one go downhill, 2 of them be pretty level. I would love for one of them for you to use a short iron, one of them for you to use a short to medium iron, one to use a medium to long iron, and one to use maybe a fairway wood, right? I'd like to build in as much variety as possible. So that's just pointing out that today you don't really have that. Now, whether or not you guys want that, some
We want it on
we-
the list.
We'd
Okay.
like to see it written down.
Okay.
I just want them so they don't forget that one
Yeah.
that you mentioned. We shouldn't have to use a driver and a wood all the time on part 4s.
The women's tee box needs to go back on 7.
Go forward.
Yeah, I think we leave that one, let's just move the other one up.
It's right next to the yellows.
Don't think we don't know.
Forward and right.
So I realize we don't have a ton of kids out at the course or young families, but what are some of the things other clubs are doing or other courses are doing that like incorporate the youth and the kids and whether it's the practice area or the course or what?
Yeah. So you've got kind of 2 different buckets there. So you've got programming, which Brian and the team set up and how they use that. And then you've got amenities. What are the physical amenities? So, when you think about that, whether it's the practice facility, the driving range, and, for example, if you had a tee at the far end that was really good for lessons or something like that, that might be helpful. A putting course or a big giant putting green that you could set up a putting course on. A short course is a great spot to have, kids be able to go there and feel comfortable and learn, and then they can kind of graduate up to the big course. So those are some of the things. You can also do things on the golf course where you can have, little kid plates out on the holes that are, 100 yards from the green or whatever. So family tees or kid tees out there, types of things. So you've got those, and then you've got the programming elements, which are the events that Brian sets up and things like that.
Are all short courses like 9 holes or whatever? Like, if they ever make like a couple kid holes or whatever?
Why is that as 6? Why is that as 6?
So yeah, they come in different. I'm working with a club in Houston. We're laying out a little 5-hole short course. The one at Sand Valley is 17 holes. The one at Forest Dunes is 10 holes. So, the beauty of a little short course is that it's not. People have a very different attitude than they do on a regulation golf course. When you're on the regulation golf course, most players are worried about their score, right? And they're keeping their score and they're counting all their strokes and they're trying to get a score. And particularly at a hard golf course, that just leads to a lot of frustration. For whatever reason, when people go to these little short courses, they could care less what their score is. They are there to have fun. They might have a drink in their hand, they might have their little 4-year-old with them, and they don't care. They just want to have a good time. And so from a designer standpoint, it actually gives you more freedom in the design. You know, designers will design a green on a short course that they would never design on a big course, and it might have much bigger slopes and more interesting stuff going on, because if they put it on the big course and people were really worried about their score, people might say, oh, that's unfair. Just total BS, but you know, that might be what they would say. But for whatever reason, the short course, people have a completely different attitude towards it, and so therefore the designs can be a little bit more interesting and more fun and whatever.
Yeah, what they did at Van and Dunes is exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
It's really cool.
Great
Stuff
short
all over.
It kind of solves two problems too, because it's a practice, almost a practice facility. It's a short game practice almost spot, and it's kind of cool fun to do.
A short course can serve, you know, for people who are good golfers or really want to get better, it's a great short game practice area, right? I mean, it's the biggest and the best short game practice area you can get. For others, it's a place to go gamble or a little kid.
I just haven't been home since.
One of the things that we haven't addressed, and I know you were commenting on earlier or in some of your initial meetings with staff around here, is clubhouse facilities. And knowing that that's a challenge for us, that we're probably not gonna be going out and building a big addition on the current clubhouse or tearing one down and building it. But one of the ways that we can expand our use of the space around here is connecting outside either of this facility down here, which is our banquet facility, and utilize it that way, or down at the other end, off the grill area, for additional decking can be added to expand our ability to host, larger events.
Yep.
But the kitchen can't handle it.
You talked about all these wonderful goals and everything. Could you just name 3 examples on the course of which you would change today? If you could go out there anything. Just give me 3. Besides taking away that sand trap on 16, which is a bitch.
What'd you do? I missed the last part.
Sand trap on 16.
We're not having the sand trap on 16 for the ladies, because that's just terrible.
Well, I'll use a different part of 16. If you look up by the green, right?
Yep.
At the green, you've got that big long sand trap,
Yeah.
right? Now, for a top player, 85 to 90% of that bunker is not in play. The only portion of that bunker that is in play for a top player is the one right at the green, the edge closest to the green. Now, that big bunker leading up to it is in play for an average golfer. Now, if an average golfer gets in there, it's chunk, skull, whatever, right? So that's a perfect example of, okay, if you were to keep the portion up by the green, but get rid of 75% of the other, now all of a sudden it's probably better for maintenance, you've got more usable space, more room to play, something like that. So that's that would be an example.
That's perfect.
When you've got these areas with pond left, pond right. No bailout, you gotta get a path through there. You know, can you find a creative way to reconfigure that so you've got bailout areas so that you've got a place to play golf, right? The walk back from 4 to 5T is dangerous and ugly, right? You know, you got some challenges there. So things like that.
Thank you.
Agree with all.
Oh, okay. Anything else? All right, we will race over to Fletcher's.
I don't see drainage on there.